Welcome to Sorting Out Sounds. This course is for parents and carers of preschool children who are now talking, but who may be missing or changing some sounds, sometimes making it difficult for others to understand what they're saying.
This is common when children are learning to talk, and often there are many things we can do at home to help. During this course, we will be looking at the following: the difference between speech and language, typical changes that children make in their speech, ways to help your child's speech sound development.
Let's start by thinking of two words that are often used to describe talking, but which have different meaning. First of all, language. What does language mean to you? Language means understanding the words that somebody says. Language means the words or the sentences that we use to send a message. Of course, we can also send a message without words. We might use our hands or gesture to point. We could also mean the written word or using symbols.
How about speech? Speech is the physical production of sounds we make. For example, s or k. Sometimes we might think of speech as being pronunciation or articulation. Let's show you an example. I've got a toy car and a toy duck. Imagine showing these two objects to your child. You might ask, "Where's the car?" Your child might point to the car but say the word tar. This shows that your child can understand and use that word car, but they haven't yet developed their k sound. So their language is there, but their speech is still developing.
There are so many skills that children learn to develop as part of their communication. Children need a strong foundation in their attention and listening skills, their understanding, and their talking. These skills are important to establish before speech can fully develop. If you want more information about this or have any concerns about other areas of communication, then please see our video about the communication pyramid.
Speaking is a highly complex process that involves lots of different parts of our body working well together. In order to speak, we need to hear, think, and breathe. We also need the muscles of the voice box, the tongue, and our mouth. Speech requires a sophisticated level of coordination, so it's not surprising that young children in these early stages of development might need some support along the way. Where do we begin to support a child within this complex process? Let's have a look at this next diagram to help us answer that question. Speaking is often the thing that stands out and that other people might notice. What do you do if your child makes a sound error? Do you ask them to copy a sound or a word? Actually, what we need to do is to start that support at an earlier stage of listening. Once a child has that ideal environment of being able to hear well, they can listen between sounds and tell the difference between sounds. This helps their learning of sounds. Once that learning is in place, they will eventually be able to make those sounds and use those sounds within their speech. Once the child is talking and using those sounds, they'll be able to hear themselves so they can monitor what they are saying to ensure that it makes sense, as we all do when we're talking. So it becomes this loop of listening, learning, and speaking that all need to coordinate well together. Difficulties with hearing can impact on speech development. If you have any concerns about your child's hearing, then speak with your GP or your health visitor.
Think back to the very early sounds your child made when they were a baby. In those early days, a lot of their communication was through crying. Then they would have started cooing and then babbling. Their babbling would have consisted of consonants, for example, b, and vowels, for example, a, like ba 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 ba. Children start to have a go at simple words and these gradually become clearer. It takes practice for our children to master their speech sounds. Sounds don't all develop at the same time, but they do usually follow a typical pattern. This table shows the age at which children typically learn sounds in the English language. You might notice that your child may be able to say a sound on its own, but they can't yet say it in a word. We often describe speech sounds in 3 different ways: back or front, long or short, noisy or quiet.
Some sounds are made at the front of the mouth, like p or b or t or d. And some sounds are made further back in the mouth, like k or g.
Some sounds are long, for example, s or z or and some are short, for example, p or b or d or t.
Some sounds are noisy, for example, z, v, g, d, b. And some are quiet, for example, s or f or k or t or p. To demonstrate this, if you lightly touch your voice box or your larynx while saying a noisy sound like z, then you'll feel the vibration. If you lightly touch your voice box or your larynx while saying a quiet sound like s, then you won't feel a vibration. Speech sound changes are very typical in preschool children. You might have noticed some of these things in your child's speech.
Do any of these speech patterns sound familiar? So the first example is where a child might miss off the end of a word. So dog becomes do, house becomes how. This is also described as final consonant deletion. Another example might be where a child reduces longer words. So banana becomes nana, tomato becomes mato. This is also called weak syllable deletion. Your child might use front sounds instead of back sounds, so car becomes ta, go becomes do. This is also called fronting. Another example is where your child might use noisy sounds instead of quiet sounds, so p becomes b, tie becomes die. This is also called voicing. Your child might use short sounds instead of long sounds, so C becomes T, feet becomes beat, hair becomes tear, Joe becomes dough. This is also described as stopping. And finally, you might notice your child uses one sound where there should be 2 or 3. And these go back to the clusters or blends that we talked about previously. So spoon becomes poon, flower becomes fower. This is also described as cluster reduction.
It's our job as speech and language therapists to work out what children are doing with their speech. Please don't worry about picking out these patterns yourself. This is purely to give you some background. It's probably more helpful to think about how much your child is understood by you and others as an indicator of whether they need a referral to speech and language therapy. This slide might be a helpful reminder of what to look out for. By nearly 3 years, you should be able to understand most of what your child says, but others may only understand them about half of the time. By nearly 4 years, your child may still make speech errors, but unfamiliar listeners will understand them most of the time. And by around 5 years, children may still be making errors, but other people should understand their speech nearly all of the time.